Welcome, God's chosen ones. You didn't just survive the last season of your life, you passed. And I need you to understand the full weight of what that means. Because what you went through wasn't random, it wasn't punishment, and it wasn't a mistake. It was a test. A specifically designed, personally assigned, divinely orchestrated examination, and you are still standing on the other side of it. Let that sink in. Most people will spend their entire lives wondering why things happened to them. Why the silence? Why the loss? Why the door that wouldn't open? The relationship that ended? The season that felt like being buried alive? But you're about to find out. Because today, I'm telling you everything. Every bit of what happened to you, what it meant, and why it was necessary. This isn't a consolation speech. This is your results letter, and it says you passed. So stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't just motivation, it's a revelation. Let's get into it. Here's something you need to know before we break this down. Research in developmental psychology consistently shows that the most resilient, emotionally sophisticated, and purposeful people on Earth are not those who had easy lives. They're the ones who were tested hardest and chose not to break. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. It's the same pattern you'll find in the life of every person who ever changed the world, led a movement, rebuilt a family, or became someone the next generation points to as an example. They all went through something most people wouldn't survive, and they all came out not just intact, but transformed. That's you. While others were gliding through seasons that felt safe but shallow, you were being forged. The confusion you felt wasn't weakness. The isolation wasn't abandonment. The delay wasn't rejection. It was preparation. And the proof that you passed isn't just that you're here. It's how you're here. Different, deeper, more powerful than you've ever been. So let's break this down. Here's everything you were never told until now. 1. The test was never designed to destroy you. It was designed to define you. Let me start at the very beginning, because everything else builds on this. The hardest chapter of your life wasn't sent to end you, it was sent to locate you, to find out who you really were when the applause stopped, when the support system vanished, when nobody was watching, and there was nothing left to gain by staying the course. Most people think God tests people to punish them, but that's not how it works. The test wasn't about your punishment, it was about your positioning. You can't place someone in a position of power, influence, and purpose without first verifying that they can handle the pressure that comes with it. You don't hand someone the keys to a kingdom and skip the interview. The test was the interview. And while other people crumbled under pressure, compromised their values to get comfortable again, went back to what was familiar even though it was killing them, you held. You didn't always hold gracefully. Some days you held by your fingernails, crying on the bathroom floor, barely making it through, but you held. And holding is passing. That's what separates the called from the chosen. The called hear the invitation. The chosen show up, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when they can't see what's on the other side. You showed up every single time. That's why you're here. You weren't broken by the test. You were built by it. 2. The silence you endured was not God going quiet. It was God going to work. You remember the quiet season. Maybe you're still in it or just coming out of it. That stretch of time where it felt like heaven had gone offline, like your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, like the direction you once had so clearly just disappeared. Most people interpret silence as absence. They panic, they force open doors that weren't meant for them yet. They settle for options that were never God's best because at least those options responded. But you waited. And that waiting cost you something. It cost you comfort. It cost you the ability to explain yourself to people who didn't understand why you weren't moving. It cost you the shallow validation of looking like you had it all figured out. But here's what silence actually means in the divine economy. It means something is being built that can't be rushed. You know how construction sites always look chaotic, like nothing is happening, like there's no progress. just dust and noise and confusion. Then one day the scaffolding comes down and there's a building that wasn't there before. That's your silence. God wasn't quiet because he forgot you. He was quiet because he was working on something too significant to narrate in real time. The architects of the most stunning structures in history never narrated every nail. They just built. And what's being built for you required a silence that was never about abandonment. It was about concentration. You were being concentrated, purified, sharpened. Don't apologize for the quiet season. It's where the most important work of your life was being done. 3. You were being separated, not excluded. There's a difference. This one is personal, because the loneliness hit different. Not just the physical kind, the kind where it's Friday night and you could reach out, but you already know the conversation won't reach where you actually live right now. Not the surface loneliness, the deep kind. The kind where you feel like you're operating on a frequency nobody else around you can hear. And you started to wonder if something was wrong with you. Why can't I just enjoy what they enjoy? Why does this feel so hollow? Why does the thing everyone says should make me happy leave me completely empty? Here's why. Because you are being separated, not excluded. Separated. Those are not the same thing. Exclusion is rejection. Separation is selection. When gold is being refined, it gets separated from everything it's been mixed with. Not because the mixture was worthless, but because the gold has a different destination. You have a different destination. The people who fell away from you, the environments that started to suffocate you, the version of life you outgrew without choosing to. All of that was separation, not punishment, not bad luck. Separation. The things and people you can no longer connect with aren't evidence that you're broken. They're evidence that your frequency changed, and your frequency changed because your assignment changed. They couldn't go where you're going, not because they're bad, but because they weren't built for that terrain. You were. That lonely season wasn't rejection. It was redirection. You weren't left out. You were set apart. 4. Every door that closed was protecting you from something you couldn't see. You knocked. You knocked hard. You did everything right. You showed up early. You worked harder than everyone in the room. You prayed over it. You prepared for it. You could already picture yourself in it. And it closed. And it didn't just close quietly. It closed publicly, awkwardly, in ways that made you look like you were failing when you were actually being protected. This is the one that hurts the most because you were ready, or at least you thought you were ready. But here's the thing about closed doors. The person on the outside of a closed door can never see what's happening on the other side of it. You can't see the collapse that was 3 months away. You can't see the person who was already in that position getting destroyed by the very thing you were reaching for. You can't see the toxic culture, the hidden agenda, the ceiling that would have trapped you for years, the relationship that would have drained you dry. You just see the door, and the door said no. Most people get bitter about closed doors. They build their entire identity around the story of what didn't open for them, carrying it around like a wound, letting it prove that God doesn't care, that the world is rigged, that they're not enough. But you let it close. You might have grieved it, and you were allowed to. But you let it close, and because you let it close, you stayed free. You stayed available for the thing that was actually yours. The door didn't close on your destiny. It closed on a detour, and the detour would have cost you everything. Thank God for the closed door. One day, sooner than you think, you'll look back and say, that was the best no I ever received. 5. The people who left you were clearing space for who's coming. I need you to stop mourning the exits. I need you to really hear this one. The people who walked out, the friends who ghosted, the relationships that ended, the inner circle that quietly became the outer circle. They weren't just leaving, they were making room. Because your life has a capacity. You only have so much energy, so much emotional bandwidth, so much relational space. And for a long time, that space was occupied by people who were using more than they were adding. People who needed your light but couldn't stand your growth. People who were comfortable with a version of you that God was finished with. When they left, It felt like loss, but it was actually inventory management. Think of it like a house that needs renovation. Before you can put in the new floors, somebody has to rip up the old ones. The ripping up phase is loud and messy and looks like destruction, but it's not destruction, it's preparation. The exits in your life were the ripping up phase. Every person who left created space, emotional space, spiritual space, relational space, for the people who are assigned to the next chapter of your story. People who can actually see you, people who celebrate you without being threatened by you, people who are building something and recognize what you carry. Those people are coming. Some of them are already at the edge of your life, but they couldn't come in while the old tenants were still there. The exits weren't abandonment, they were renovation. Thank the people who left. They just made room for your breakthrough. 6. The pain that didn't break you was giving you authority. Here's something they never explain in church. Authority isn't given, it's earned. Not by performing well when things are easy, by remaining faithful, grounded, and spiritually intact when everything is on fire. The people who walk into a room and command attention without saying a word, who carry a kind of weight and gravitas that makes you lean in when they speak, they didn't buy that. They bled for it. The authority you carry right now, the depth in your eyes, the calmness in your spirit that confuses people who know what you've been through, that didn't come from a good season. It came from surviving a terrible one and choosing not to let it make you someone you're not. Most people who go through what you went through either come out hardened or they come out defeated. They either build a wall so thick that nothing can touch them, including the good things, or they crumble and let the story of their suffering become their entire identity. But you did neither. You came out soft in the right ways and strong in the right ways. You came out with compassion that has depth because you know what it costs to suffer. You came out with discernment that you can't get from a book. You came out with a voice that carries weight because it carries truth. That's authority, not the kind you perform, the kind you've earned. And everyone in the room can feel it, even if they can't name it. You didn't just survive the pain, you converted it. That's the move of a chosen one. 7. Your breakthrough was delayed because it was being made bigger. This one might be the most important thing I tell you today, because here's where a lot of chosen people give up, right before their breakthrough. Not because they ran out of faith, because they got tired of waiting for what was promised. And the cruel irony is this: the reason it's taking so long is because it's being made bigger than your original ask. You prayed for a door, God is building you a building. You asked for one connection, God is constructing an entire network. You were ready to settle for the version of your dream that fit in your current understanding. But God refused to give you a smaller version of what He originally designed for you, just to ease your impatience. So it looks like nothing is happening. It looks like the timeline broke. It looks like everyone else got their turn, and yours was somehow skipped. Meanwhile, the architects are still working. The infrastructure is still being laid, the details are still being perfected, and they can't rush it because the scale of what's coming doesn't allow for shortcuts. The bigger the building, the deeper the foundation has to go, and the deeper the foundation has to go, the longer the pre-construction phase looks like an empty lot. You're not an empty lot, you're a pre-construction site with underground work happening that nobody standing on the surface can see. The delay is not rejection, the delay is expansion. What's coming for you couldn't fit in the timeline you had in mind, so the timeline had to be adjusted. Hold on. What's being built for you is worth the wait, because it's bigger than what you originally asked for. 8. The loneliness was building an internal foundation the world could never shake. You know what's interesting about people who were forced into extended seasons of solitude? They come out with something that people who were always surrounded by noise simply don't have: an unshakable interior life. They know who they are when no one is watching. They know what they believe when no one is clapping. They know what they're made of when there is no external structure to hold them up. Most people don't know who they are without an audience. Their identity is assembled from outside opinions: what people say about them, how many likes they get, whether the room validates them. Take away the room and they collapse. Take away your room and you went deeper. You learned to sit with yourself. You learned to hear your own thoughts without drowning them in distraction. You learned to comfort yourself in ways that didn't require substances, busyness, or constant human contact. That's rare. That is genuinely rare, and it makes you unshakable in a way that people who've never been truly alone don't understand. When the opposition comes, and it will come, it always comes, it cannot reach the part of you that was built in the solitude. Because that part of you doesn't need anything from the outside world to hold itself together. You built your foundation in the quiet room, and the quiet room gave you something the crowded room never could. Yourself. Nobody can take that from you. Not one person, not one storm, not one season. 9. You kept your integrity. When it would have been easier to compromise. And that's why you're still standing. Let's be honest, you had options, not once, multiple times. You could have lied your way out of the hard season. You could have taken the shortcut that would have solved the immediate problem and created a much bigger one down the road. You could have manipulated the situation, played the game the way everyone around you was playing it, given people what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to know, sold out just a little, just enough to get comfortable. Nobody would have blamed you. In fact, most people around you were doing exactly that and calling it wisdom, but you didn't. And it cost you. Not keeping your integrity cost you nothing in the moment and everything in the long run. But keeping your integrity cost you something in the moment and nothing in the long run. Because the thing about integrity is that it's a seed. You plant it in seasons where it costs you, and it grows in seasons where you need it most. Right now, your integrity is mature. It grew in the hard seasons. It survived the pressure. And now it's bearing fruit. In the trust people instinctively place in you, in the reputation that preceded you into rooms before you arrived, in the open doors that have your name on them because someone in authority watched how you handled yourself when it was hard and decided you were the one to trust. Your integrity is your greatest asset. It's also the reason they can't touch you. The people who compromise to get ahead have nothing to stand on when the wind shifts. You have everything to stand on. You kept your word when it cost you, and now your word is worth more than anything they bought with their compromise. 10. What felt like rock bottom was actually the launching pad. There's a specific kind of moment that every chosen person knows. It's the moment where everything is stripped away. The moment where you sit in the rubble of everything you thought your life was going to be, and you genuinely don't know what comes next. No plan, no backup, no idea. Just you, the wreckage, and a choice about what story you decide to tell yourself about what just happened. Most people decide the story is over. They call that rock bottom the final chapter, the proof that it didn't work, that they weren't enough, that God wasn't listening. But rock bottom is not the final chapter for chosen ones. It's the foundation. You cannot build upward on unstable ground. And before the season you went through, a lot of what you were standing on was unstable, built on other people's expectations, on versions of yourself you'd outgrown, on achievements that were impressive but hollow. The stripping away didn't take your life from you. It cleared the ground so that what gets built next has nothing underneath it that will eventually give way. What felt like the worst moment of your life was actually a mercy. It cleared the site. And now, what's being constructed on that cleared ground will stand. Not because you're lucky, because the foundation is solid. Rock bottom was not your ending. It was the moment your real story, the one that was always meant for you, finally had room to begin. 11. The enemies who tried to stop you were unknowingly confirming your assignment. I want you to really sit with this one because it might change the way you see the opposition entirely. The people who went out of their way to block you, undermine you, whisper about you, try to discredit you before you could rise. They were not accidents in your story. They were confirmation. Because here's what's true. Nobody wastes energy trying to stop something that doesn't have real power. You don't mount a campaign against someone who doesn't matter. You don't organize a strategy to undo someone who poses no threat. The very fact that opposition showed up, coordinated, intentional, committed opposition, is evidence that something about you was recognized as a genuine threat to the kingdom of small thinking, small living, and small power. The enemy doesn't spend resources on irrelevant targets. Every whisper campaign, every attempt to discredit you before you arrived, every person who got nervous when they heard your name, they were all, without knowing it, writing letters of recommendation on your behalf. They were saying, "This one matters. This one has something real. This one is the real deal, and we need to stop it before it gets started." They failed. Not because you were louder or more powerful or had better connections, because what was on you was protected, and what is protected by the Most High is not stopped by any lesser force. No matter how many meetings they hold about you, let them whisper. Every whisper confirms your assignment. That's not a threat to your destiny. That's a footnote in your testimony. 12. Your gifts were preserved in the waiting, not wasted. This is the lie the enemy told you in the waiting season, and I need to expose it right now, that you were falling behind. That while you were in the holding pattern, something was being lost. Your edge, your momentum, your relevance, your window. That the world was moving and you were standing still, and by the time you got where you were going, it would be too late. That lie has kept more chosen people on the sidelines than almost any other weapon in the arsenal. But here's the truth. Your gifts don't expire. Your anointing doesn't have a shelf life. The ability God placed inside of you before you were born was not dependent on a specific timeline, a specific age, a specific cultural moment. It was built to deploy when you were ready, not when circumstances looked optimal on paper. And the waiting didn't erode your gifts, it deepened them. The patience you built in the waiting gave you discipline that raw talent alone never produces. The humility you developed when nothing was happening gave you a groundedness that will keep you from destroying yourself when everything starts moving fast. The wisdom you accumulated watching others make mistakes you avoided, that's not a delay. That's an education. You didn't waste the waiting. You were equipped in it. And now the gifts that were preserved in the waiting are seasoned in a way that early deployment would never have allowed. You didn't miss your window. You were being prepared to walk through it with everything you need to sustain what's on the other side. 13. The test required your whole self, because the assignment requires your whole self. Here's the part most people never understand about the test. It wasn't testing just one thing. It wasn't just testing your patience, or your faith, or your integrity, or your resilience. It was testing all of it simultaneously. Because the assignment on the other side of the test is not a one-dimensional calling. You were not made to do one small thing in one small area with one small kind of influence. You carry a multidimensional purpose, the kind that touches lives across generations, across contexts, across types of people who would never otherwise be in the same room. That kind of purpose requires a whole person, not a version of you that's spiritually strong but emotionally unavailable. Not a version of you that's resilient but bitter. Not a version of you that's gifted but untrustworthy. The test needed to develop all of you, every part, every layer, every dimension. And that's why it was so comprehensive. That's why it hit different areas of your life at what felt like the same time. Your relationships, your finances, your confidence, your health, your vision. Because the assignment required that every single one of those areas be forged, and now they have been. You're not a partial version of yourself standing at the threshold of your purpose. You're the full version, tested at every point, proven at every level, whole in the way that only the furnace produces. That's not an accident. That's architecture. You were built this way on purpose. 14. You passed. And now, the things that were held back are being released. I've been building to this the whole time, and now I'm saying it plainly. You passed. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, not without moments where you questioned everything, where you sat in the dark and asked if any of it was real, where you were so tired that the word trust felt like cruelty. You passed through all of that. And passing doesn't mean you never doubted. It means you never stopped. You never fully quit. You never walked away from the version of yourself that believed, even when that belief was barely a flicker, that there was something on the other side of the pain worth staying for. And because you didn't quit, the release is coming. The things that were held back, the connections, the opportunities, the favor, the financial breakthroughs, the healing, the recognition, the open doors, they were not canceled. They were held in trust, waiting for the moment when you were ready to receive them in the fullness they were designed with. Because some things can't be released into a version of you that isn't prepared for them. The right opportunity in the wrong hands gets destroyed. The right relationship at the wrong level of wholeness becomes another wound. The right breakthrough before the foundation is solid becomes a collapse. But you're ready now. The foundation is solid. The character is proven. The faith has been tested. And now what was held is being released. Not as a trickle, not as a partial measure, not as a consolation prize, but in the fullness of what God designed before time began. You are standing at the beginning of your release. Get ready. As you reflect on everything we've covered today, let one truth anchor itself into the deepest part of who you are. You were not broken by what happened to you. You were built by it. Every closed door, every silent season, every exit, every night where the weight felt impossible, none of it was wasted. None of it was a mistake. None of it happened without purpose. It was all, from beginning to end, a divine curriculum designed for someone who was always meant to lead, to heal, to build, to serve, to rise in a way that gives others permission to believe that rising is still possible. You were the seed buried in winter who confused the ground for a grave. You were the gold inside the fire who heard the heat as destruction instead of refinement. You were the building in pre-construction that looked like an empty lot to everyone standing on the surface. But underneath, the work was happening. Underneath, the foundation was being laid that nothing, not one storm, not one opposition, not one force assembled against you, will ever be able to move. You were tested so you could be trusted. You were held back so you could be prepared. You were separated so you could be positioned. You were silenced so you could be strengthened. And now the season of release is beginning. So carry this forward. Carry it into every room you walk into, every conversation you have, every moment where the voice of doubt whispers that it was all too hard for too long for no reason. Carry the knowledge that you passed, not because you were perfect, because you were chosen, and chosen ones don't quit. They don't quit on their assignment, they don't quit on their God, and they don't quit on themselves. You are still here, you are still standing, and what's coming for you now is not a reward for perfect performance. It's the fulfillment of a promise that was written before you were born. This is not the end of your story. This is the chapter where it finally begins to make sense. And I believe with everything in me that the best of your life, the version of it that was always meant for you, is being unlocked right now. Walk into it. You've earned it. You passed. If this message found you today, if it landed exactly where you needed it to, if it spoke to something you've been carrying that you didn't even know how to put into words, please don't let it stop here. Subscribe to Chosen to Lead so you don't miss a single message in this community. This is a space built for people who know they were made for more, and there's more coming that you don't want to miss. Hit that like button if this confirmed something in your spirit today, if it felt less like content and more like a conversation God was already trying to have with you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what season of your life does this message speak to most? I genuinely want to hear from you. Your words matter and your story matters. And share this video with someone who is still in the waiting, someone who is still in the middle of the test and doesn't know yet that they're going to pass. Because maybe the most powerful thing you can do today is hand somebody the encouragement that got you through. Be that person for someone else. Thank you for being here. God bless you.